The ambulance bay doors of Station 51 stood open to the February cold, letting in air that cut like surgical steel. Jordan Blake pulled her jacket tighter as she stepped through, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, eyes adjusting to the fluorescent lighting that made everything look sterile and harsh. It was 3:17 in the morning, and the station had that particular quality of quietness that came just before the city woke up demanding attention. She'd chosen the overnight shift deliberately. Fewer questions that way. Fewer eyes watching her every move. Captain Marcus Reeves stood near Ambulance 51, clipboard in hand, inspecting equipment with the methodical attention of someone who'd done this for longer than Jordan had been alive. 24 years with Chicago Fire Department, according to the paperwork she'd read. Old school. By the book. The kind of supervisor who believed protocols existed for good reasons, and deviation meant weakness. Perfect. He looked up as her footsteps echoed across the concrete floor, and something in his expression hardened immediately. Not hostility exactly, but assessment. The look of a man who'd seen too many rookies wash out to waste energy on optimism. "You're Blake." His voice carried the rough edges of 1,000 cigarettes smoked in younger years, though his lungs sounded clear enough when he spoke. "Transfer from Iowa, the file says." "Something like that, sir." Jordan kept her response minimal, setting down her bag with practiced care. She'd learned long ago that the less you said, the less people could use against you later. Reeves circled around her like a predator evaluating prey, eyes cataloging everything. Her posture, too straight. Her hands, too steady for someone supposedly nervous on their first night. The way she'd positioned her bag within arm's reach, rather than setting it aside carelessly. Iowa EMS must run differently than Chicago. He gestured toward the open rear doors of the ambulance. "Because that's not how we organize trauma bags here." Jordan followed his gaze. Her medical kit sat exactly where she'd placed it during equipment check, arranged with surgical precision. Combat gauze in the outer pocket for immediate access. Hemostatic agents organized by application speed. Chest decompression needles in their own sealed compartment, protected but retrievable in under 3 seconds. It was perfect. And that was the problem. You alphabetize your supplies? There was skepticism in every syllable. "Makes it faster to find what I need under pressure, sir." Under pressure. Reeves pulled her kit out, examining it with increasing suspicion. "These chest seals, this is medical-grade equipment. Same with the decompression needles. Where exactly did you work in Iowa?" Jordan's jaw tightened fractionally. "Rural systems sometimes get donated equipment from larger hospitals. We used what we had available. It wasn't a lie. Not technically. The equipment had come from hospitals, just not civilian ones." Reeves set the kit down harder than necessary. "Let me make something clear, Blake. I've been running this house for 6 years. Before that, I spent 18 years on ambulances just like this one. I know every trick, every shortcut, every cowboy move a paramedic thinks makes them special." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "We follow protocols here. We work as a team. We don't have heroes. We have professionals who do their jobs and go home alive. Understood?" "Understood, sir." "Good." He turned away, then paused. "And Blake? That watch you're wearing. Move it to your other wrist. We check radial pulses on the left. Don't want your timepiece interfering with patient assessment." Jordan's hand moved instinctively to her right wrist, where a simple black tactical watch covered the small tattoo she'd gotten 8 years ago. The one that marked her as something she no longer wanted to be. "I'm left-handed, sir. More natural for me this way." Reeves studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your call. Just don't let it slow you down." As he walked away toward his office, Jordan released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The watch stayed exactly where it was, covering the small trident insignia that would raise questions she couldn't answer. Not here. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Blake. A new voice, younger and nervous. She turned to see a kid who couldn't be older than 26, approaching with an uncertain smile. Tommy Chen, according to his name tag. "I'm your partner for tonight. Well, technically every night until they rotate us, but, you know. I mean, not that you'd know because you're new, but that's how it works here." Jordan extended her hand. Jordan Blake. Good to meet you. Tommy's handshake was firm, but his palms were sweating despite the cold. So, Iowa, huh? That must be pretty different from Chicago. I mean, obviously it's different, I just meant like the call volume and the types of emergencies and stuff, it's different. Jordan moved past him to continue her equipment check, pulling out monitor cables and testing battery levels with efficient movements that betrayed more training than most paramedics received. Tommy watched her work with growing curiosity. You're really thorough. That's good. Captain Reeves likes thorough. He talks about protocols a lot. But honestly, if you just do your job and don't try to be a hero, you'll be fine. The last person in your spot tried to intubate without physician orders, and Reeves basically made her life hell until she transferred out. Jordan's hands didn't pause. Good to know. The station intercom crackled to life with a dispatcher's flat voice. Ambulance 51, medical emergency. 78-year-old male, chest pain, difficulty breathing. 2847 North Halstead Street, apartment 4B. Timeout 0334. That's us. Tommy grabbed his jacket, suddenly all business despite his earlier nervousness. You ready for your first Chicago call? Jordan was already moving toward the driver's side door, muscle memory taking over. Then she caught herself. Reeves was watching from his office window. She stepped back. You drive. I'll navigate and prep. Tommy looked surprised but pleased. Really? Most paramedics fight over who drives. Not me. Jordan climbed into the passenger seat, pulling on gloves as Tommy started the engine. As they rolled out of the station, sirens wailing into the pre-dawn darkness, she caught sight of her reflection in the side mirror, blonde hair pulled back tight, blue eyes that had seen too much, the face of someone trying very hard to disappear into normal, trying and failing. Behind them, Ambulance 51's bay lights illuminated Captain Reeves still standing in his office window, watching them leave with an expression Jordan couldn't quite read. Suspicion, maybe, or recognition of something he couldn't quite name. Either way, she had exactly one shift to prove she belonged here, one chance to be just another paramedic in just another city, doing just another job. The city lights blurred past as they raced toward their first call, and Jordan felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. She'd walked away from one life to build another, left behind everything she'd been to become something simpler, quieter, less complicated. But as her fingers automatically checked her equipment one more time, arranging supplies in a pattern no civilian training taught, she wondered if you could ever really leave behind who you'd been, or if the past just waited for the right moment to drag you back. The apartment building on North Halstead was one of those pre-war structures with narrow hallways and stairs that groaned under weight. Tommy led the way up to the 4th floor, equipment bag bouncing against his hip with each step. Jordan followed close behind, portable monitor case in one hand, oxygen tank in the other, her breathing steady despite the climb. Apartment 4B had its door propped open by a worried-looking woman in her 50s, probably a neighbor. Inside, an elderly man sat slumped in a recliner, one hand pressed against his chest, skin pale and clammy under the lamplight. Tom Cavanaugh, according to the driver's license the neighbor thrust at them. 78 years old, diabetic, history of hypertension. The walls told stories Jordan had learned to read years ago. Military service photos from Vietnam. Black and white images of a younger Tom in jungle fatigue standing with his unit, the 173rd Airborne, judging by the patches visible in one frame. A purple heart displayed in a shadow box. The careful arrangement of a man who'd made peace with his past, but never quite left it behind. Mr. Cavanaugh. I'm Tommy. This is Jordan. We're paramedics with Chicago Fire. Can you tell me what's happening? Chest pain. The words came out breathless, labored. Started about 30 minutes ago. Feels like someone's sitting on me. Tommy moved to take vital signs while Jordan knelt beside the chair, eyes cataloging everything her partner wasn't seeing. The way Tom's left eyelid drooped slightly. The subtle tremor in his right hand that had nothing to do with pain. The pattern of his breathing, irregular in a way that suggested neurological compromise rather than cardiac distress. Mr. Cavanaugh, you were 173rd Airborne. Jordan kept her voice conversational, watching his pupils as she spoke. My grandfather served. Different war, same brotherhood. Tom's eyes focused on her, showing recognition despite his condition. "Good man, your grandfather. How'd you know my unit?" "The shadow box." Jordan gestured toward the wall while her fingers found his carotid pulse. "Distinctive patch. Were you at DAC-TO?" "Second wave." Tom tried to smile, but the expression faltered, drooping more on one side than the other. "Worst month of my life. Sir, I need you to do something for me." "Squeeze my hands, both at the same time." Tom complied, but his left grip was noticeably weaker. Tommy looked up from the blood pressure cuff. BP is 160/95. Pulse is 88 and regular. Chest pain is probably angina. We should start cardiac protocol. Jordan met Tommy's eyes across the patient. "Check his coordination. Ask him to touch his nose, then your finger." Tommy's forehead creased. "But the presenting complaint is chest pain. Standard protocol says, just do it, please." There was something in Jordan's tone that made Tommy comply without further argument. He held up his finger, asked Tom to alternate touching his own nose and Tommy's fingertip. The elderly veteran tried, but his movements were uncoordinated, missing the target by centimeters. "That's not cardiac." Jordan was already pulling out her phone, preparing to call ahead to the hospital. "Mr. Kavanaugh, the chest pain you're feeling isn't your heart. You're having a stroke. The discomfort you're experiencing is referred pain from the neurological event." "A stroke?" Tommy's voice rose slightly. "But all the classic signs, the chest pain, the sweating, can also present with posterior circulation strokes." Jordan was setting up the monitor now, movements efficient. "Check his pupils again. See the ptosis on the left? The coordination problems? The pattern fits cerebellar infarct." "I don't understand." Tommy looked between Jordan and the patient. "How can you tell just by looking at him?" 8 years of... Jordan caught herself. 8 years of studying presentations that don't fit the textbook. When you see enough variation, you learn to recognize the outliers. She had the monitor running now, capturing 12 lead EKG that would support her assessment. The readout showed exactly what she expected. Normal sinus rhythm, no ST elevation, no signs of acute coronary syndrome. But Tom's coordination was deteriorating even in the few minutes they'd been there. "We need to move him now. Stroke protocol. Notify Chicago Memorial we're coming in with suspected posterior circulation CVA. Time is tissue." "But Blake, protocol says for cardiac complaints we run the full assessment before transport." Tommy was pulling out his protocol binder, clearly uncomfortable with deviating from procedure. Captain Reeves specifically said. The radio on Jordan's belt crackled. "Ambulance 51, what's your status?" Reeves's voice carried the edge of someone monitoring his new hire's first call. Tommy reached for the radio, but Jordan was faster. "Ambulance 51. We have a 78-year-old male, initially presenting with chest discomfort, but clinical assessment indicates cerebellar CVA. Requesting stroke alert at Chicago Memorial, ETA 12 minutes. There was a pause. "Blake, your partner reports cardiac symptoms. Run the cardiac protocol." "Sir, EKG shows normal sinus rhythm. Patient has left side weakness, coordination deficit, and progressive symptoms consistent with posterior stroke. Every minute we delay decreases his chances of recovery." Another longer pause. Then Reeves' voice came back, tight with controlled skepticism. "Transport to Chicago Memorial. By the book. If you're wrong about this, Blake, we're going to have a conversation." Jordan handed the radio to Tommy without responding. They had Tom on the stair chair, and moving within 2 minutes, Jordan calling ahead with stroke alert notification, while Tommy followed her lead with obvious hesitation. In the ambulance, Jordan worked with practiced efficiency. IV access, oxygen, blood glucose check, continuous monitoring. She'd done this hundreds of times before, though under very different circumstances. The muscle memory took over, hands moving in patterns that civilian training alone couldn't teach. "How did you know?" Tommy kept his voice low, glancing between Jordan and the patient. "I've been doing this for 3 years, and I would have run full cardiac protocol. We'd have wasted 30 minutes. Pattern recognition." Jordan adjusted the oxygen flow. "When you've seen enough strokes, you learn they don't always present like the textbooks say. But the chest pain, the sweating, those are textbook cardiac signs. They're also nonspecific symptoms that can accompany any major physiological stress. Jordan checked Tom's blood pressure again, noting the slight increase. His military service, the photos on the wall, that told me he's someone who wouldn't complain about subtle symptoms. By the time he called 911 for chest pain, something significant was happening. The question was what? So you just guessed? I assessed. There's a difference. Tom stirred, consciousness wavering. His left side was noticeably weaker now, the progression Jordan had feared. They were 8 minutes from the hospital, but it might not be fast enough. Stroke was unforgiving that way, stealing function with every passing second. Chicago Memorial's ER entrance came into view, emergency department staff already waiting outside with a gurney. Dr. Lisa Park stood among them, 48 years old with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been the attending physician at Chicago Memorial for 6 years, running one of the busiest trauma centers in the city with efficiency that bordered on military precision. 78-year-old male, Tom Cavanaugh. Tommy launched into the report as they transferred the patient. Presented with chest pain and dyspnea, but Blake suspected stroke. We've got left side weakness, coordination deficits, progressive symptoms over the past 20 minutes. Doctor. Park was already performing her own rapid assessment, movements economical and practiced. EKG, normal sinus rhythm. Jordan handed over the printout. No ST elevation, no significant arrhythmias. Pupils show left ptosis, clear weakness in left upper and lower extremities, failed coordination testing. Time of symptom onset? Initial chest discomfort began approximately 45 minutes ago, based on neighbor statement. Neurological symptoms became apparent within 10 minutes of our arrival. Dr. Park's eyes flicked up to meet Jordan's, and there was something in that gaze, assessment, and recognition mixed together. Get him to CT now. We're within the window for intervention if this is what I think it is. The CT scan 20 minutes later confirmed what Jordan had known from the moment she'd seen Tom's face. Massive cerebellar infarction, caught early enough that intervention was possible. Dr. Park emerged from the radiology suite with the images on her tablet, her expression thoughtful as she approached where Jordan stood filling out paperwork. That was excellent assessment, Blake. Most paramedics would have run cardiac protocol and transported routine. You saved this man significant disability, possibly his life. Just doing my job, ma'am. No. Dr. Park's tone sharpened slightly. You did something more than standard protocol. That kind of recognition, that ability to see past the obvious presentation, that comes from experience most paramedics never get. Jordan kept her eyes on her paperwork. I've been fortunate to work with good mentors. In Iowa. Dr. Park's voice carried a note of skepticism so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. Her gaze dropped briefly to Jordan's wrist, where the edge of the watch had shifted slightly, revealing the smallest glimpse of ink underneath. Must have been quite a program. Their eyes met for a moment, and Jordan saw calculation there. Pieces fitting together in a mind trained to recognize patterns. But before Dr. Park could ask whatever question was forming, Captain Reeves's voice cut through the ER noise. Blake. His presence seemed to fill the space. Report. Jordan straightened. Tom Cavanaugh, 78. Presenting complaint of chest pain. Clinical assessment indicated posterior circulation cerebrovascular accident, confirmed by CT scan showing cerebellar infarction. Patient is currently being prepped for possible intervention. You deviated from standard cardiac protocol. Reeves's voice was carefully controlled. I assessed the patient and determined neurological emergency took precedence. The cardiac symptoms were secondary to the primary event. You've been with Chicago Fire for exactly 4 hours. Reeves stepped closer, voice dropping. You don't have the experience to make those kind of judgment calls. With respect, sir, the patient's outcome speaks for itself. Luck. Reeves's jaw tightened. Don't mistake one good call for competence. You follow protocols, Blake. You don't freelance. Is that understood? Yes, sir. But even as Jordan said it, she could feel Dr. Park's eyes still on her, watching the interaction with interest that went beyond professional curiosity. And as they walked back to the ambulance, Jordan knew that her first call had drawn exactly the kind of attention she'd been trying to avoid. The sun was rising over Chicago as they drove back to Station 51, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed obscene after the night's intensity. Tommy was quiet beside her, processing what he'd witnessed, and Jordan stared out at the awakening city, wondering how long she could maintain the pretense that she was just another paramedic who'd gotten lucky on her first call. Behind them, in the ER, Dr. Park stood looking at the spot where Jordan had been standing, her mind turning over details that didn't quite fit. A paramedic who recognized subtle strokes, who moved with efficiency that suggested far more than civilian training, who wore a watch that couldn't quite hide what looked like the edge of a very specific kind of tattoo. And Dr. Park, who'd spent 6 years as a Navy medical officer before transitioning to civilian practice, knew exactly what kind of ink might require that level of concealment. The morning briefing at Station 51 had the uncomfortable energy of a courtroom before verdict. 8 paramedics sat in the day room, coffee cooling in mugs, as Captain Reeves stood near the duty board, arms crossed. Jordan kept her eyes forward, aware of the sideways glances from colleagues she'd barely met. Blake's call this morning was effective. Reeves's voice carried no warmth. The stroke diagnosis was confirmed. Patient is being prepped for intervention at Chicago Memorial. He paused. It was also completely outside standard protocol for a presenting complaint of chest pain. Across the room, Jake Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran with graying temples and the confident posture of someone who'd seen everything, leaned forward. "With respect, Captain, the outcome speaks for itself. If Blake had run standard cardiac protocol, that patient would have lost significant function. The outcome was fortunate." Reeves's emphasis on the last word made it clear what he thought of Jordan's assessment. Protocols exist for reasons. They protect patients, and they protect us. When paramedics start freelancing based on hunches, people get hurt. Jordan said nothing. There was no winning this argument, not on her first day. The dispatch tones cut through the tension. All available units, multi-vehicle accident, Interstate 90 westbound at Ashland Avenue, multiple casualties, possible entrapment, fire department en route. Reeves grabbed his jacket. Everyone responds. This is going to be ugly. The scene on I-90 was worse than the dispatch suggested. 5 vehicles tangled together in the westbound lanes. Morning commute traffic backing up for miles. A semi-truck had jackknifed trying to avoid a stalled sedan, causing a chain reaction that left twisted metal and shattered glass across 3 lanes. Fire trucks were already on scene, crews working to extricate victims trapped in crushed vehicles. Jordan and Tommy were directed to the shoulder area, where the walking wounded were being collected. Minor injuries, stable patients who could wait while resources focused on the critical cases. Standard triage, sensible allocation of limited personnel. But Jordan's eyes were already tracking patterns that didn't fit. She treated a woman with a lacerated forearm, applying pressure and bandaging with efficient movements while her attention kept drifting to the periphery. There, sitting calmly on the guardrail about 50 yards from the main accident, was a man in work clothes. Mid-40s. No visible injuries. Seemingly waiting his turn with the patience of someone in no particular distress. Something was wrong. "Tommy, I'll be right back." Jordan handed off the bandaging supplies and moved toward the man before her partner could ask questions. "Sir, were you involved in the accident?" The man looked up, face pale beneath the dirt. "Yeah, my truck's the Ford over there. Just got bumped from behind. Nothing serious." Jordan knelt beside him, eyes cataloging details her conscious mind hadn't yet processed into words. The way he sat perfectly still despite the chaos around him, the subtle distension of his neck veins, the respiratory rate that was just slightly too fast, too shallow. Any pain? Difficulty breathing? "I'm fine, really. Just shaken up. You should help the people who actually need it." Jordan was already pulling out her stethoscope, movements calm, despite the alarm bells ringing in her training. "I'm going to listen to your lungs, just to be safe." The breath sounds were diminished on the right side. Drastically diminished. "Sir, I need you to stay very still." Her voice remained level even as her hands moved to her radio. "You have a collapsed lung, and it's getting worse. If I don't treat this right now, your heart is going to stop." "What?" The man's eyes widened. "But I feel fine. That's the problem. You're compensating. Your body is working overtime to maintain blood pressure and oxygen levels, but it can't keep this up much longer. She was already signaling to Tommy, who came running. I need the jump bag. Now. Blake, what are you doing? Captain Reeves appeared from between the vehicles, face tight with frustration. I assigned you to minor injuries. We have critical patients. This is critical. Jordan didn't look away from her patient as she spoke. Tension, pneumothorax. Right side. He's compensating now, but he'll code within 10 minutes if I don't decompress. You can't possibly know that just by looking at him. Diminished breath sounds right side. Jugular venous distension, tachypnea, and he's maintaining blood pressure through sheer compensatory mechanisms. Jordan was pulling supplies from the trauma bag Tommy had brought. I'm decompressing. Now, you need physician authorization for needle decompression. Reeves's voice dropped to a dangerous register. That is not a field decision for a paramedic to make independently. By the time I get authorization, he'll be in cardiac arrest. Jordan's hands were steady as she prepped the decompression needle. 14 gauge, and long enough to reach the pleural space. Sir, this is going to hurt for a second, but it will save your life. I need you to trust me. The patient nodded, fear finally breaking through his compensatory calm. Blake, if you do this without orders, Reeves started. Then write me up. Jordan found her landmark, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, and inserted the needle with the smooth confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. The rush of air was immediate and audible, trapped pressure releasing from the pleural cavity. The patient gasped, color flooding back into his face as his lung reinflated. Holy shit, I can breathe. I couldn't breathe before, but I didn't realize. Jordan was already securing the catheter, monitoring his response. You were in shock. Your body was shutting down non-essential functions to keep your brain and heart alive. Another few minutes, and it would have failed. Around them, other paramedics had stopped to watch. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison from Engine 19 stood nearby, eyes wide. I've been doing this for 5 years. That guy looked completely stable from where I was standing. Jake Rodriguez approached slowly, studying Jordan with renewed interest. I've seen maybe 3 tension pneumos in 15 years on the job. You spotted it from 50 yards away in a guy who had no obvious symptoms. He paused. That's not normal assessment skill, Blake. Where exactly did you train? Different places. Jordan was focused on her patient, checking vitals that were steadily improving. Pulse dropping from 110 to 85. Blood pressure stabilizing at 120/70. He'd make it. Captain Reeves stood silent, jaw working as he processed what had happened. Finally, he keyed his radio. Chicago Memorial. We have a 43-year-old male, motor vehicle accident with tension pneumothorax, successfully decompressed in field. Vitals are stabilizing. ETA 12 minutes. He looked at Jordan. Expression unreadable. We'll discuss your decision-making process later, Blake. In detail. Yes, sir. As they loaded the patient for transport, Tommy kept glancing at Jordan like she'd suddenly sprouted wings. How did you see that? I was standing right next to you, and I didn't notice anything wrong with him. You learn to see what doesn't fit. Jordan adjusted the oxygen flow. In a mass casualty situation, the quietest patient is sometimes the sickest. They're too busy compensating to complain. But the assessment you did, the way you moved. Tommy struggled for words. It's like you've done this 1,000 times. Jordan said nothing, because the truth was she had done it more than 1,000 times. In places where tension pneumothorax meant life or death with no hospital backup, no physician oversight, just training and instinct, and the absolute necessity of being right. Back at the hospital, Dr. Park met them at the ambulance bay. Her eyes went immediately to Jordan, something sharp and assessing in her gaze. Mr. Kavanagh is in recovery. The intervention was successful. Full function expected with rehabilitation. That's excellent news. Jordan kept her voice professional. Thanks to your assessment. Dr. Park stepped closer as they transferred the pneumothorax patient to the ER staff. 2 unusual saves in 1 shift, Blake. Most paramedics go months without a single case that deviates from standard presentations. You've had 2 in 6 hours. Just paying attention, ma'am. Doctor, Park's eyes dropped briefly to Jordan's wrist, where she was adjusting the IV line. The watch had shifted again, revealing another glimpse of ink, to things that other people with equivalent training don't see. That's interesting, don't you think? Jordan met her gaze steadily. Pattern recognition improves with experience. Indeed it does. Dr. Park's smile didn't reach her eyes. Especially certain kinds of experience. The kind that teaches you to recognize tension pneumothorax in compensating patients. The kind that makes needle decompression feel routine rather than emergency procedure requiring authorization. Their eyes held for a moment before Dr. Park turned away, leaving Jordan with the uncomfortable certainty that the physician had recognized something in her technique, her confidence, her complete lack of hesitation in situations that should have made a civilian paramedic pause. The shift briefing that afternoon was tense. Reeves stood at the front of the room, jaw tight, as he addressed the assembled crews. Blake performed an unauthorized field procedure today that happened to have a positive outcome. The emphasis on happened made his position clear. This does not set precedent. Protocols exist to protect patients and providers. Freelancing, even successful freelancing, undermines the system we all depend on. But Captain, Jake Rodriguez spoke up again. Both patients are alive because Blake recognized presentations that standard protocols would have missed. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for luck. Reeves looked directly at Jordan. And luck runs out. Next time, Blake, you follow chain of command. You get authorization. You work within the system. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Jordan kept her expression neutral, but inside she was calculating how long she could maintain this pretense. How many more calls before someone started asking questions she couldn't answer? How many more procedures before her training became too obvious to explain away as good mentoring or fortunate guessing? As the briefing broke up, Jordan headed for the equipment bay to restock supplies. Lieutenant Morrison caught up with her near the ambulance. That was incredible work today. Morrison's voice was quiet, but genuine. You saved 2 lives that would have been lost. I don't care what Reeves says about protocols. Thank you. Morrison hesitated. I have a brother who's Army. Medic. He talks about combat medicine sometimes, about having to make calls without backup or authorization. The way you work, it reminds me of how he describes battlefield assessment. She paused. Is that crazy? Jordan's hand stilled on the equipment bag. That's an interesting observation. But you're from Iowa. Morrison's tone made it half question, half statement. I'm from a lot of places. Jordan resumed organizing supplies. Iowa was just the most recent. Morrison nodded slowly, accepting the non-answer. Well, wherever you trained, I'm glad you're here. Chicago needs paramedics who can think outside the protocols when it matters. As Morrison walked away, Jordan finished restocking with movements that had become automatic over years of practice. Around her, the station settled into afternoon routine. But she could feel the weight of attention that hadn't been there that morning. People were starting to notice, starting to wonder, starting to see past the carefully constructed facade of the competent but unremarkable transfer from a rural system. And somewhere in the hospital across town, Dr. Park was probably pulling strings, making calls, asking questions about the new paramedic who moved like someone with tactical medical training. Jordan had known this moment would come eventually. She just hadn't expected it to happen on her first day. The afternoon had settled into routine when the dispatch tones shattered the quiet. All available units, structural collapse, Michigan Avenue construction site. Estimated 15 to 20 casualties, multiple critical injuries, ongoing collapse hazard. All Chicago Fire Department resources respond. Jordan was in the equipment bay when the call came through, restocking supplies that had been depleted during the morning's calls. Around her, the station erupted into controlled chaos. Firefighters grabbing gear, engines firing up, the organized rush of people who'd trained for exactly this scenario. Captain Reeves appeared in the bay doorway. Everyone responds. Blake, Chen, you're with me in the command vehicle. This is going to be a long operation. The scene on Michigan Avenue looked like a war zone. A 12-story building under renovation, its scaffolding collapsed along the entire western face. Workers lay scattered across the street, some moving, some terrifyingly still. Dust hung in the air thick enough to taste, and the groaning of stressed metal suggested the structure wasn't done settling yet. Incident command was establishing itself in a clear zone 2 blocks back. Fire trucks positioned themselves strategically, crews already moving toward the debris field with rescue equipment. Jordan could see at least 20 victims from where she stood, and there were probably more buried in the wreckage. Reeves was coordinating with other commanders, assigning resources with the efficiency of someone who'd run mass casualty incidents before. Blake, Chen, you're in the green zone. That's walking wounded, minor injuries, people who can wait for treatment. The critical cases go to red zone. That's where our experienced crews will work. Jordan understood the logic. Put the rookie somewhere she couldn't do damage if she made mistakes. Keep her away from the life or death decisions. Standard protocol for someone on their first day. She also understood that standard protocol was about to get people killed. The green zone was organized chaos. 15 patients with various injuries, most of them stable enough to sit or stand while awaiting treatment. Jordan moved among them, performing rapid assessments, applying bandages, documenting injuries. Tommy worked beside her, his nervousness from the morning replaced by focused competence. But Jordan's attention kept drifting beyond the green zone perimeter. The injury patterns weren't right. Scaffolding collapses created specific trauma types. Falls from height caused predictable fractures, specific internal injuries. But some of these workers had injuries that didn't match simple falls. Blast patterns, fragmentation wounds, the kind of damage you saw when explosives were involved, not structural failure. Tommy, stay with these patients. Jordan set down her trauma bag, eyes scanning the broader scene. I need to check something. Blake, we're supposed to stay in our zone. Tommy's voice carried uncertainty. Captain Reeves said, I know what he said. Jordan was already moving toward the edge of the green zone, studying the debris field with practiced eyes. Something's wrong with this collapse. The damage pattern doesn't fit. 50 yards away, in what should have been a safe staging area, a man sat on the curb, mid-30s, wearing construction gear, no visible injuries. He looked calm, patient, waiting his turn like someone who believed he wasn't seriously hurt. Jordan had seen that look before. In places where people died because they didn't realize how badly they were injured until it was too late. She crossed the perimeter before anyone could stop her. Sir, I'm Jordan. I'm a paramedic. Were you on the scaffolding when it collapsed? The man looked up. David Hawkins, but everyone calls me Hawk. Yeah, I was on the 3rd level. Got thrown clear when it came down. He gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. Lucky, I guess. Any pain? Difficulty breathing? My left arm's pretty banged up, but nothing serious. You should help the guys who are really hurt. Jordan knelt beside him, her assessment already cataloging details that told a different story. The way he favored his left side. The shallow, controlled breathing. The compound fracture of his left radius that was obvious once you looked past the dirt and debris coating his arm. This isn't minor. Jordan was pulling supplies from the kit she'd grabbed. You have a compound fracture, possible internal injuries, and you're going into shock. I need to splint this arm and get you transported immediately. I'm fine, really. Hawk tried to wave her off, but the movement made him wince. It's just a break. I've had worse. When? Where did you serve? The question seemed to catch him off guard. 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers. 3 deployments. How did you... Your pain tolerance and the way you're minimizing a serious injury. That's operator mentality. Jordan was already splinting the fracture with efficient movements. But shock doesn't care about your pain threshold, and this fracture needs surgical repair before you lose function in that hand. Across the scene, she could hear Reeves's voice on the radio, coordinating resources. But something else caught her attention. A sound that didn't belong. The sharp crack of overstressed metal, different from the general groaning of the damaged structure. Everyone back. The shout came from one of the structural engineers. Secondary collapse imminent. Jordan's training took over before conscious thought could interfere. She grabbed Hawk, pulling him away from the curb just as a section of scaffolding broke free and crashed exactly where he'd been sitting. The explosion came 3 seconds later. Gas line rupture, later reports would say. A pocket of natural gas that had been leaking into a void space, finally finding an ignition source in the sparking of metal against metal. The fireball rose 50 feet into the winter sky, and the blast wave knocked people off their feet across the entire scene. Jordan covered Hawk instinctively, body between him and the explosion, feeling the heat wash over her back. When she looked up, the scene had transformed from controlled emergency to absolute chaos. New casualties everywhere, the carefully organized triage areas disrupted, people screaming and running. And in the center of it all, near what had been the main collapse site, a worker was trapped beneath a fallen beam. Crush injury to the chest and abdomen. 2 senior paramedics were backing away, shaking their heads. Too far gone. Focus on the salvageable patients. Jordan moved before thinking about consequences. The trapped worker was unconscious, pinned from mid-chest down by steel that must have weighed 300 pounds. His face was ashen, blood seeping from his mouth. By every standard assessment, he was minutes from death. But Jordan had seen worse survive. In places where giving up meant choosing who lived and who died, and she'd learned to recognize the difference between truly lost and just extremely difficult. "Blake, what are you doing?" Reeves appeared beside her, face streaked with dust and blood from a cut on his forehead. "We need to evacuate the critical patients we can actually save. This man is salvageable." Jordan was already assessing the crush injury, calculating what she'd need. "I've seen patients with worse injuries survive if treated immediately. We need lifting equipment and a surgical team ready for emergency thoracotomy. There's no time to wait for equipment." Reeves's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "And you don't have the authority to call for surgical teams. Blake, you need to step back and let—" "I'm not stepping back." Jordan looked up at him, and something in her eyes made the captain pause. "This man has a family. He has people who need him to live. And I know how to save him, if you give me the resources and stop questioning my assessment." Around them, other first responders had stopped to watch. Lieutenant Morrison from Engine 19, Jake Rodriguez from another ambulance, Tommy Chen standing frozen with a trauma bag, torn between following orders and following Jordan. And then Hawk, the Army Ranger she'd been treating, spoke up. His voice was weak, but clear through the pain and shock. She knows what she's doing. "Captain, I've worked with combat medics in Kandahar. I know what that training looks like." He paused, trying to focus through the injury and medication. "That woman moves like someone who's done this under fire. You should listen to her." Reeves looked between Jordan and Hawk, something shifting in his expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but recognition that maybe, possibly, he didn't have all the information about his newest paramedic. "Fine. You have 5 minutes to stabilize him for transport. After that, we evacuate whether he's stable or not. Understood?" "Understood." Jordan didn't waste time on gratitude. Her hands were already moving, performing assessments that would tell her exactly what she was dealing with. Crushed chest causing paradoxical breathing, probable liver laceration, possible spinal involvement. This would take every bit of training she'd accumulated over 8 years of pulling people back from the edge. Tommy appeared beside her. "What do you need?" "Morphine for pain management, 2 large bore IVs, blood pressure support, and get me the pneumatic lifting bags from Engine 19. We'll need to raise this beam carefully to avoid further crushing when we extract him." As Tommy ran to get equipment, Jordan felt Hawk's eyes on her. Even through his pain, he was studying her with the intense focus of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Kandahar," he mumbled. 2019. There was a forward operating base. A pararescue jumper saved 23 operators during an ambush. He struggled to focus. They said she went in alone. Under fire for 4 hours. Everyone thought the mission was suicide, but she got them all out. Jordan's hands didn't stop moving. "You're confused. The pain medication is affecting your memory." "No." Hawk's voice was clearer now, fighting through the shock. "I remember the briefing. They called it Operation Salvage. The PJ who ran it was a woman. Only a handful of female PJs in the entire Air Force. And they said she had blonde hair. Around them, everyone had gone quiet. Tommy had returned with the equipment, but stood frozen, eyes wide. Lieutenant Morrison was staring. Even Captain Reeves had stopped coordinating to listen. Jordan met Hawk's gaze for one long moment. Then she looked away and focused on the crush victim beneath the beam. "Right now, Sergeant Hawkins, You're in shock, and you're injured, and you're not making sense. What I need from you is to let my partner treat your fracture while I focus on saving this man's life. Can you do that?" Hawk nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. The puzzle pieces were clicking together in his mind, even through pain and trauma. And everyone watching knew they'd just witnessed something significant, even if they didn't yet understand what. The beam came free with the pneumatic lifts, and Jordan worked with speed that seemed impossible. IV access, medication, pressure dressings, rapid packaging for transport. The victim's vitals were terrible but improving, marginally, enough to suggest he might actually make it if they moved fast enough. As they loaded him into an ambulance, Reeves approached Jordan. His expression was unreadable. "That was extraordinary work, Blake. But Hawkins's comments suggest we need to have a serious conversation about your background. Soon." "Yes, sir." Jordan stripped off her gloves, hands rock steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. She'd known this moment would come. She just hadn't expected it to happen in the middle of a disaster scene, with an injured ranger putting together pieces of a puzzle she'd spent years trying to bury. Around her, the chaos of the mass casualty incident continued. But Jordan could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes, all looking at her differently than they had that morning. The secret was starting to unravel, and there was no way to stop it. The station was quiet when they returned near dusk, that particular stillness that came after major incidents, when everyone was too exhausted for casual conversation. Jordan moved through the apparatus bay, restocking equipment with mechanical precision, each motion calculated to appear routine, while her mind raced through exit strategies she hoped she wouldn't need. Blake. Tommy appeared beside her, voice low. "Everyone's talking. About what Hawk said. About Kandahar and operation names and things that sound classified. People say a lot of things under stress and medication." Jordan didn't look up from organizing trauma supplies. He was confused. Was he? Tommy leaned against the ambulance. "Because Jake Rodriguez pulled up Operation Salvage on a military forum. It's real. Air Force Pararescue Mission, 2019, Afghanistan. Classified details, but the basic story is out there. One PJ saved 23 operators during an hours-long firefight." Jordan's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. Then she resumed her work. "Interesting story, Jordan." Tommy moved closer, lowering his voice further. "I've been your partner for one shift, and I've learned more about emergency medicine than I did in 6 months of training. The way you assess patients, the procedures you know, the confidence you have in situations that should terrify someone new to Chicago. That's not Iowa EMS experience." Before Jordan could respond, footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. Dr. Lisa Park walked into the bay, still wearing her hospital scrubs, face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd spent the afternoon treating mass casualty victims. "Dr. Blake, I was hoping we could talk." Park's tone was professional but carried an undertone of determination. "Somewhere private, if possible. Captain Reeves is waiting for my incident report." Jordan kept her voice neutral. "This won't take long, and frankly, it's a conversation you'll want to have with me before you have it with anyone else. Trust me on that." Tommy looked between them, reading tension he didn't fully understand. "I'll finish the restock. You should go." The station's break room was small and empty, afternoon light filtering through windows that overlooked the apparatus bay. "Doctor." Park closed the door behind them with the careful deliberation of someone establishing boundaries for a difficult conversation. "How long have you been in Chicago?" Park didn't waste time with preamble. "This is my first shift at Station 51. That's not what I asked." Park moved to the window, looking out at the ambulances below. "I worked Navy medical for 6 years before transitioning to civilian practice. Served aboard USS Ronald Reagan. Did 2 deployments supporting Marine operations in Middle East. So I know what military medical training looks like, particularly special operations medical training." Jordan remained standing near the door. "That must have been challenging work. It taught me to recognize patterns." Park turned to face her directly. "The way you move. The efficiency of your procedures. The complete absence of hesitation in situations that should require consultation or authorization. That's not civilian paramedic training, no matter how good the program. I had excellent mentors. Stop deflecting. Park's voice hardened slightly. I saw your tattoo this morning. Just the edge of it when you were removing gloves at the hospital. And I know what a trident insignia looks like, even partially hidden under a watch. Jordan felt the walls closing in, but maintained her expression. You're making assumptions based on incomplete information. Am I? Park pulled out her phone, displaying a photo of the taped briefing from Chicago Memorial's staff meeting. Tom Cavanaugh, the stroke patient you diagnosed this morning. His outcome was discussed at our afternoon conference. Remarkable save, catching a cerebellar infarct that presented atypically. The kind of assessment that requires not just knowledge, but extensive field experience with neurological trauma under pressure. She swiped to another image. Then there's the tension pneumothorax case. Spotting compensatory mechanisms in a patient who appeared stable to every other responder on scene. Field decompression without hesitation. And this afternoon. Park's voice dropped. Mass casualty incident. You stabilized a crush injury victim that 2 senior paramedics had already triaged as unsalvageable. Use techniques that aren't in any civilian protocol I've ever seen. Jordan met her eyes steadily. What exactly are you asking me, Dr. Park? I'm asking if you're Air Force pararescue. Because everything I've observed today points to someone with tactical medical training, someone who's worked mass casualty situations in combat environments, someone who's learned to make life and death decisions without backup or authorization because there was no other choice. The silence stretched between them. Through the window, Jordan could see Tommy finishing the equipment restock, Jake Rodriguez talking with Lieutenant Morrison near Engine 19, Captain Reeves emerging from his office with that look of determination that meant difficult conversations were coming. If I was, Jordan spoke carefully. If I had that background, why would I be working civilian EMS in Chicago? That's what I'm trying to understand. Park's tone softened slightly. Because someone with Air Force pararescue credentials could work anywhere. Could teach, could write their own ticket at any major trauma center, could consult on tactical medical programs worldwide. But instead, you're hiding your skills, deflecting questions, wearing a watch to cover insignia you should be proud of. Maybe some doors close for good reasons. Or maybe someone is running from something that wasn't their fault. Park moved closer, voice dropping to something almost gentle. Jordan, I've seen the pattern before. Operators who leave service carrying guilt for situations they couldn't control. Medical personnel who make impossible choices and then blame themselves when not everyone survives. You don't know anything about my situation. Then tell me. Park's expression showed genuine concern beneath the professional assessment. Because right now, you're one call away from Captain Reeves demanding answers. One conversation away from your background becoming public knowledge. And once that happens, you lose control of the narrative completely. Jordan looked away, jaw tight. Some things are better left in the past. Not when they affect your present. Park pressed. And definitely not when they could help people in the future. Chicago needs paramedics with your skills, your training, your experience. But they can't utilize you properly if they don't know what you're capable of. Before Jordan could respond, her radio crackled. All units, officer down, shots fired, Michigan and Wacker. Active shooter situation, multiple casualties, SWAT responding. All available Chicago fire resources stage 2 blocks from scene. Jordan's hand went to her radio instinctively, muscle memory from hundreds of similar calls taking over. That's less than a mile from here. You're not seriously considering responding. Park's voice carried disbelief. Active shooter situations require specialized response. Civilian paramedics stage outside the perimeter until scene is secure. That's protocol. Jordan was already moving toward the door. Jordan, wait. Park grabbed her arm. We're not finished with this conversation. Yes, we are. Jordan pulled free gently but firmly. Because people are dying right now, and I can help them, and everything else can wait. If you go into that scene, if you do anything that reveals your tactical training, you won't be able to hide anymore. Park's voice carried both warning and understanding. Everyone will know. Reeves will demand explanations. The department will investigate. Your quiet civilian life ends tonight. Jordan paused at the door, hand on the handle. Then I guess it was never going to last anyway. She looked back at Park. something breaking in her carefully maintained facade. "I came to Chicago because I thought I could stop being the person who runs toward gunfire while everyone else runs away. I thought I could learn to let protocol and procedure and proper channels handle the emergencies." She took a breath. "But I was wrong. Because that's not who I am. It's never been who I am. I know." Park's expression held sad recognition. "I ran toward fire once too. It's why I understand what you're feeling right now. And why I'm telling you to think very carefully before you go out that door." Jordan met her eyes for a long moment. Then she pushed through the door and ran toward the apparatus bay, where Tommy was already starting up Ambulance 51. Park stood alone in the break room, watching through the window as the ambulance rolled out with lights and sirens. She pulled out her phone, hesitated for only a second, then made a call. "Captain Reeves, this is Dr. Park from Chicago Memorial. We need to talk about Jordan Blake. Before the situation tonight forces a conversation neither of you are prepared for." On the phone, Reeves's voice carried confusion and growing concern. "What situation? What's going on with Blake?" She's about to prove exactly who she is. Park watched the ambulance disappear into traffic. "And when she does, you're going to understand why Iowa EMS never made sense, why her skills don't match her resume, and why Chicago might have just gotten the most qualified tactical paramedic in the country, whether she wanted anyone to know it or not." Through the window, the last of the emergency vehicles pulled out, heading toward a scene where shots were still being fired and officers were bleeding out, and protocol said to wait for scene security before entering. Protocol that someone with Jordan Blake's training had been taught to ignore when lives were at stake. Park closed her eyes, recognizing the impossible position Jordan was in. Because once you learn to run toward danger, once you develop the skills to save lives under fire, you couldn't unknow it, couldn't unlearn it, couldn't stand back and let people die when you knew you could help. The past wasn't something you left behind. It was something that defined who you became. And tonight, Jordan Blake was going to have to choose between the person she'd been trying to become and the person she'd always been. Park suspected she already knew which choice Jordan would make. The same choice any operator would make when faced with people dying and the skills to save them. The same choice that had driven Park herself into Navy medical service years ago. You didn't choose the mission. The mission chose you. And all you could do was be ready when it called. Michigan and Wacker at night looked like something from a war zone Jordan had tried to leave behind. Police vehicles formed a perimeter 2 blocks out, their lights painting the buildings in alternating red and blue. Beyond them, in the hot zone where bullets had been fired minutes earlier, 2 Chicago police officers lay bleeding while their colleagues returned sporadic fire at a barricaded suspect. Ambulance 51 pulled up to the staging area where Incident Command had established itself behind a concrete barrier. Captain Reeves was already there, coordinating with Police Tactical Commander. His face went hard when he saw Jordan climbing out of the ambulance. "Blake, what are you doing here? You were off duty after the collapse incident. I heard the call." Jordan's voice was level, professional. "Multiple casualties. You need every available paramedic. The scene is not secure." Reeves pointed toward the hot zone where muzzle flashes still lit up windows. "SWAT is 8 minutes out. We stage here and wait for scene security. That's protocol." Jordan moved to the barrier, assessing the situation with eyes trained to calculate angles, cover positions, evacuation routes. She could see the first officer down, approximately 60 yards into the hot zone, his partner applying pressure to a wound but doing it wrong, too high on the thigh when the actual bleeding was femoral. "That officer has maybe 4 minutes before he bleeds out." Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd made these calculations hundreds of times. "His partner is applying pressure in the wrong location. If I don't get to him now, SWAT arrives to a body. You don't know that from here." Reeves stepped between Jordan and the hot zone. "And even if you did, protocol is clear. Civilian paramedics do not enter active fire zones. Ever." Around them, other first responders were listening. Tommy had pulled the trauma bag from the ambulance, his face showing the conflict between following orders and following the paramedic who'd been right about every assessment all day. Lieutenant Morrison stood nearby, radio in hand, eyes moving between Jordan and the bleeding officer. The police tactical commander, a hard-faced woman named Captain Rodriguez, approached. "Your paramedic is right about the timeline. Officer Mendoza won't last until SWAT secures the scene. But Reeves is also right about protocol. I can't authorize civilian medical to enter. Then don't authorize it. Jordan was already stripping off her outer jacket, checking her trauma bag contents. I'm going anyway. Blake, that's an order. Reeves' voice dropped to dangerous levels. You set foot past this barrier and you're done. Fired. No second chances. No explanations. This is where your freelancing ends. Jordan met his eyes steadily. Then I guess I'm fired. She hoisted the trauma bag, muscle memory from years of tactical insertions taking over. Because I'm not watching someone die when I know I can save them. She moved before anyone could physically stop her, breaking from cover with movements that betrayed training no civilian paramedic possessed. Not a straight run, but tactical advancement, using vehicles and concrete barriers for protection, moving in patterns designed to minimize exposure to the shooter's position. Behind her, she heard Reeves shouting into his radio. Officers started moving to provide covering fire automatically, responding to the authority in her movements even if they didn't understand it. Jordan reached the first officer in 20 seconds that felt like 20 minutes. She dropped beside him, hands already assessing the wound before conscious thought caught up. Officer Mendoza, 32 years old according to his name tag, femoral artery compromised, losing blood faster than his body could compensate. His partner, Officer Chen, had pressure on the wound but 3 inches too high to actually control the bleeding source. Move your hands. Jordan's voice carried command that made Chen comply without thinking. She found the actual arterial bleed, applied a tourniquet with practiced efficiency that came from doing this under fire in places where mistakes meant death. The bleeding slowed to manageable levels. Gunfire cracked overhead, bullets hitting the vehicle they were sheltered behind. Who the hell are you? Chen's voice shook with adrenaline and fear. Someone who's done this before. Jordan was starting an IV line now, one-handed, using Chen's body as additional cover. How long has he been down? 3 minutes, maybe 4. Chen's training was failing him under stress, hands shaking. I tried to stop the bleeding, but you did what you could. Jordan's voice gentled slightly while her hands continued their efficient work. Now I need you to hold this IV bag while I pack the wound. Can you do that? Chen nodded, grabbing the saline bag with trembling hands. The second officer was 20 yards away, partially obscured by an overturned concrete barrier. Jordan could see his chest wasn't moving properly, and she recognized the signs immediately. Tension pneumothorax, probably from bullet impact trauma, to the thoracic cavity. I need to get to your partner. Jordan finished securing Mendoza's dressing. Keep pressure exactly where I showed you. Don't move him until we have a stretcher. Understand? You can't go out there. Chen's eyes were wide. The shooter has a clean angle on that position. Then I'll move fast. Jordan was already calculating the route, the timing, the exposures. It was a problem she'd solved dozens of times in Afghanistan, in situations far worse than a single barricaded shooter with decent cover available. She made the run before her conscious mind could list all the reasons it was insane. 20 yards covered in a tactical sprint that kept her low and used every piece of cover available. Bullets hit concrete near her feet, but she was moving too fast, too unpredictably for accurate fire. The second officer, name tag reading Mendez, was unconscious, but alive. Jordan immediately saw the problem. Chest wound, penetrating trauma, air trapped in pleural space, causing the lung to collapse and putting pressure on his heart. Without immediate decompression, he'd go into cardiac arrest within minutes. She pulled out the 14-gauge needle, found her landmark by touch despite the poor lighting and ongoing gunfire, and inserted it with confidence born from hundreds of similar procedures. The rush of escaping air was immediate and audible even over the chaos. Mendez gasped, color flooding back into his face as his lung reinflated and pressure released from his heart. Jordan was securing the catheter when she heard the sound that changed everything. Running footsteps, tactical boots, the organized movement of SWAT arriving. Someone shouted for covering fire, and the pattern of gunfire changed from sporadic to suppressive. A SWAT medic dropped beside her, eyes going wide when he saw what she'd done. Jesus Christ. You did a needle decompression under active fire? His voice carried professional shock. Who are you? Paramedic. Chicago Fire. Jordan was already moving back toward Mendoza. Both patients are stabilized for transport, but need immediate evacuation to trauma center. The scene transformed rapidly as SWAT secured the shooter's position. More paramedics flooded in. Stretchers appeared, the organized chaos of extraction taking over. Jordan stepped back, letting others handle transport while her heart rate finally started coming down from combat levels. Captain Reeves stood near the barrier, face unreadable as Jordan walked back to the staging area. Around him, dozens of first responders watched in complete silence. The kind of silence that came when people had witnessed something that redefined their understanding of what was possible. Blake. Reeves's voice was carefully controlled. Report. 2 officers with life-threatening injuries, both stabilized in field. GSW to femoral artery, controlled with tourniquet and pressure dressing. Tension pneumothorax decompressed via needle thoracostomy. Both patients viable for transport and treatment. You entered an active fire zone, performed procedures under direct fire, acted completely outside every protocol we have. Reeves paused. And you saved 2 lives that would have been lost if we'd waited for SWAT. Jordan said nothing. There was nothing to say. I want answers. Now. Reeves stepped closer, voice dropping. Who are you really? Because what I just watched was not civilian paramedic training. That was tactical medical response. That was someone who's done this in combat. Around them, every first responder was listening. Tommy, Jake Rodriguez, Lieutenant Morrison, Captain Rodriguez from CPD, the SWAT team that had witnessed Jordan's run into the hot zone. There was no hiding anymore. No deflecting. The truth was written in every movement she'd made, every procedure she'd performed with confidence that couldn't be faked. Jordan took a breath, feeling the weight of 8 years of secrets finally breaking free. Major Jordan Blake. United States Air Force. Pararescue. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing the full tattoo she'd been hiding. Trident insignia with jump wings, 8 years special operations, 4 deployments Afghanistan, 2 Iraq, multiple classified missions. Silver Star for Operation Salvage, Kandahar Province, 2019. The silence was absolute. Reeves stared at the tattoo, at her face, processing information that explained everything about the last 18 hours. Why her skills didn't match her resume. Why she moved with military precision. Why she'd known exactly what to do in situations that should have required consultation. Operation Salvage. Jake Rodriguez spoke up, voice awed. I read about that. Air Force PJ saved 23 Army Rangers during extended firefight. They said she went in alone when everyone else called it suicide. That was you? Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. You're the one who held that position for 4 hours under sustained fire? Jordan nodded once. Exhaustion and relief mixing in equal measure. I chose to save lives over mission objective. My command called it failure. Said I compromised the operation by prioritizing medical over tactical. So I left. Came to Chicago thinking I could just be a regular paramedic doing regular calls. But you can't unknow what you know. Captain Rodriguez's voice held understanding. Can't unlearn those skills. And when people are dying, you can't just stand back and follow protocol that gets them killed. No. Jordan met her eyes. I can't. Which is why I shouldn't be working civilian EMS. Why I should probably leave before I cause more problems. Dr. Park's voice cut through the crowd. She'd arrived during the extraction, standing near one of the ambulances. Problems? You call saving lives problems? I call violating protocol, disobeying orders, and putting myself in danger problems. Jordan looked at Reeves. I'm sorry, Captain. You deserved better than a subordinate who can't follow the rules. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He extended his hand. You're right. I deserved better. I deserved the truth from the beginning. But Chicago needs what you are, Blake. Not a paramedic pretending to be average. A tactical medical operator who can do what no one else can. Their hands clasped, and Jordan felt something she hadn't felt in years. Acceptance. Not despite who she'd been, but because of it. Around them, first responders started moving again. The scene wrapped up, patients transported, statements taken. But Jordan knew everything had changed. The secret was out, and there was no going back to invisible anonymity. Tommy approached as Jordan was restocking equipment. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. His voice was filled with awe. You saved 2 cops who were already dead as far as everyone else was concerned. I did my job, the job I was trained for. Will you teach me? Tommy's question was earnest. Not to be you, but to be better than I am. To see what you see. To know what you know. Jordan looked at him, seeing the eager dedication that reminded her of younger operators she'd trained years ago. Maybe, if Captain Reeves doesn't fire me for insubordination. He won't. Tommy grinned, because everyone just watched you do the impossible. And now they know Chicago has someone who runs toward danger instead of away from it. That's what I'm afraid of, Jordan thought. Because once you were known for running toward danger, people expected it every time. And she'd left special operations specifically to escape that expectation. But as she watched officers Mendoza and Chen being loaded into ambulances, alive because she'd refused to follow protocol, Jordan realized something. She hadn't left the military because she'd failed. She'd left because she'd succeeded too well, and the weight of always being the person who made impossible saves had become unbearable. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. You couldn't unlearn who you were. You could only choose how to use it. And tonight, she'd chosen to be exactly who she'd always been. A warrior who fought to save lives instead of take them. And that was worth any amount of scrutiny her secret's revelation would bring. Jordan stood in Captain Reeves's office at 8 the next morning, exhausted from a sleepless night spent wondering if she still had a job. Through the window behind him, she could see the morning shift arriving, their eyes tracking her movement with a mixture of awe and curiosity that made her skin itch. Sit down, Blake. Reeves gestured to the chair across from his desk. His tone was unreadable, face showing none of the anger from the night before. Jordan sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the posture of someone awaiting judgment. The door opened before Reeves could speak. Battalion Chief Williams entered, a man in his late 50s with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd commanded operations across the entire city. Behind him came Dr. Park, still in hospital scrubs, and Police Captain Rodriguez. Jordan's stomach dropped. This wasn't a conversation. This was a tribunal. Williams took the chair beside Reeves's desk, studying Jordan with sharp eyes that cataloged everything. Major Blake. I've spent the last 12 hours reviewing your military service record. The parts that aren't classified anyway. He set a folder on the desk between them. 8 years, Air Force Pararescue. Decorated for valor. Honorable discharge with commendations. Then you disappeared for 8 months before surfacing in Chicago under credentials that are technically accurate, but deliberately misleading. I never lied about my qualifications. Jordan kept her voice level. My paramedic certifications are current and legitimate. But you omitted context that would have changed how we utilized your skills. Williams leaned forward. Why, Major? Why hide what you are? Jordan met his eyes steadily. Because I left the military to stop being that person. To stop making life and death decisions without backup or authorization. To work within a system that had protocols and procedures and didn't require me to choose who lived and who died based on tactical necessity. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Park spoke, her tone gentler than Williams. You left because Operation Salvage was classified as a mission failure. Because command blamed you for prioritizing medical evacuation over capturing a high-value target. Jordan, we accessed the after-action reports. You saved 23 operators that night, but the Taliban commander you were sent to capture escaped during the extended firefight. Jordan's jaw tightened. My orders were clear. Secure the HVT. Instead, I spent 4 hours pulling wounded Rangers out of an ambush. By the time I finished, the primary objective was gone. Command was right. I failed the mission. You succeeded at something more important. Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through. You brought home 23 soldiers who would have died. 23 men with families, futures, people who needed them. That's not failure, Major. That's heroism. The Air Force didn't see it that way. Jordan's voice carried years of accumulated bitterness. They gave me the Silver Star, and then made it very clear that my priorities were incompatible with special operations objectives. So I left. Williams exchanged glances with Reeves and came to Chicago hoping to just be a regular paramedic. Except you can't turn off that training. Can't ignore patterns that others miss. Can't follow protocol when protocol gets people killed, which is why I should resign. Jordan pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket, setting it on Reeves's desk. I can't work within your system, Captain. Last night proved that. I'll violate protocols, disobey orders, put myself in danger because that's what I was trained to do. You deserve someone who can follow the rules. Reeves picked up the envelope, looked at it for a long moment, then set it aside unopened. Tell me something, Blake. Those 2 officers last night, Mendoza and Chen. If you'd followed protocol, if you'd waited for SWAT to secure the scene, what would have happened? Mendoza would have bled out in approximately 3 minutes. Chen would have gone into cardiac arrest in under 5 minutes. Both would have been dead before SWAT established scene security. And by violating protocol, by entering an active fire zone without authorization, you saved them. Reeves leaned back in his chair. So here's my dilemma, Major. I have a paramedic who can't follow orders but saves lives that would otherwise be lost. What exactly am I supposed to do with that? Accept my resignation and find someone who can work within your system? No. William's voice carried absolute authority. What we're going to do is change the system to accommodate what you are. He opened the folder, pulling out documents. Chicago Fire Department is establishing a new unit. Tactical Emergency Medical Support, TMS. Specialized paramedics trained to operate in high-risk situations where standard EMS response is insufficient. Active shooter scenarios. Barricaded subjects. Structural collapses with ongoing hazard. Mass casualty incidents requiring field triage under dangerous conditions. Jordan's heart rate picked up. She'd heard of TEMS programs in other cities. Elite units that bridge the gap between civilian EMS and tactical operations. We need someone to lead this unit, to design the training program, establish protocols, and teach other paramedics how to work in environments most of them will never encounter. Williams looked at her directly. We need you, Major Blake. Not pretending to be a regular paramedic, being exactly who you are. I left military medicine to escape that responsibility. Jordan's voice was quiet, but firm. I can't go back to being the person everyone depends on for impossible saves. Dr. Park leaned forward. Jordan, this isn't about going back. It's about going forward. Using your experience to build something new. You wouldn't be deployed alone into combat zones. You'd work with teams, with support, with resources the Air Force never gave you. And you'd train others, Captain Rodriguez added. Share those skills so the burden isn't just on you. So when the next active shooter happens, there are multiple paramedics who know how to operate in that environment. Reeves spoke for the first time since Williams arrived. I spent 24 years thinking I knew what good emergency medicine looked like. Then I watched you work for 18 hours and realized I'd been wrong about everything. He paused. Blake, I was intimidated by you. By your skills, your confidence, your complete lack of fear in situations that terrify most people. And I tried to diminish you because it made me feel inadequate. Sir, you don't need to... Yes, I do. Reeves's voice was firm. You deserved better than a captain who couldn't see past his own insecurity. You deserved command support, not obstruction. And if you stay, if you take this position, I want to be the first person to sign up for your training program. Because I need to learn what you know. Jordan stared at him, processing words she'd never expected to hear. Around the room, she saw similar expressions. Not judgment or resentment, but genuine respect and something approaching gratitude. There would be conditions. Williams pulled out more paperwork. First, complete autonomy in how you structure and run the TEMS program. You know what works. We won't micromanage. Second, Dr. Park continued, your military service remains as private as possible. We won't advertise your background. Won't make you a poster child for tactical medicine. You're director of tactical EMS. That's the public face. Third, Captain Rodriguez smiled slightly. You get to say no. If there's a call you don't feel ready for mentally or emotionally, you can step back. This program succeeds because you're healthy and capable, not because you're burned out and making mistakes. Jordan looked at the resignation letter still sitting on Reeves's desk, then at the faces watching her with expectation and hope. I have conditions, too. Her voice was steady but careful. 1. I train everyone. No exceptions. No egos. Captain Reeves wants to learn. He sits beside rookies and takes notes like everyone else. Agreed. Williams nodded. 2. My past stays classified. The details of Operation Salvage. The missions I ran. The things I saw. That information doesn't belong in training manuals or recruitment materials. It stays buried. Agreed. Doctor. Park's expression showed understanding of what those memories cost. 3. Jordan took a breath. Tom Cavanaugh. The stroke patient from my first call. I want follow-up on his recovery. And I want confirmation that he's receiving adequate rehabilitation support. The room went quiet with surprise. Reeves pulled out his phone, typing quickly. He's at Chicago Memorial. Rehab started yesterday. Dr. Park can arrange for you to visit if you'd like. I would. Jordan felt something loosen in her chest. Because I need to know that the first person I helped in Chicago made it. That starting over meant something. The 4 officials exchanged glances. Then Williams extended his hand across the desk. Welcome to Chicago Fire Department Tactical Emergency Medical Support, Director Blake. We're honored to have you. Jordan shook his hand, feeling the weight of the title settle on her shoulders. It wasn't the anonymity she'd sought, wasn't the quiet civilian life she'd imagined, but it was honest. Real, a chance to be who she actually was instead of pretending to be someone else. The meeting broke up with discussion of timelines, budgets, training facilities. Jordan found herself swept into planning conversations that felt surreal after 18 hours of wondering if she'd be fired. Tommy caught her in the hallway as she was leaving Reeves's office. So you're staying? His face showed relief mixed with excitement. Apparently, Jordan couldn't quite process it yet. They're creating a position for me. Tactical EMS program. That's incredible. Tommy grinned. Can I still be your partner? Or does the director of tactical medicine get some fancy solo response vehicle? Jordan laughed despite herself. I suspect I'll need partners more than ever. People I can trust to watch my back when situations go wrong. Then I'm in. Tommy's expression turned serious. I meant what I said last night. I want to learn from you. Not to be you, but to be better than I am. Deal. Jordan extended her hand. But fair warning. My training program won't be easy. I'm going to push people to their limits because that's where you find out what you're actually capable of. They shook on it. And Jordan felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just acceptance, but belonging. The sense that maybe she'd found a place where being exactly who she was didn't have to be hidden or diminished. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a message from Sergeant Hawk Hawkins, the Army Ranger from the construction collapse. Got your number from incident report. Heard about the new program. Air Force PJ training Chicago Fire. That's going to save a lot of lives. Proud to have been there when your secret came out. Some things are too important to stay hidden. Semper Paratus. Jordan smiled at the para-rescue motto. Always ready. It had defined 8 years of her life, and apparently it still did. Dr. Park appeared at the end of the hallway. Jordan, before you leave. Tom Cavanaugh asked if you'd visit. He wanted to thank the paramedic who caught what everyone else missed. He says he'll make his granddaughter's wedding next month because of you. The words hit harder than Jordan expected. One life. One save. One person who'd go on to experience moments that mattered because she'd refused to accept the obvious diagnosis. Maybe that's what this new position was really about. Not running toward danger for its own sake, but ensuring that every person who could be saved actually was saved. Teaching others to see what she saw, to think beyond protocols, to fight for patients even when the odds seemed impossible. I'll visit this afternoon. Jordan adjusted her jacket, feeling the weight of the trident tattoo no longer hidden beneath her watch. Tell him I'll be there. As she walked toward the apparatus bay, Jordan caught her reflection in a window. She looked different than she had 24 hours ago. Not hiding anymore, not diminished or invisible. Just herself. Finally, completely, honestly herself. And for the first time since leaving the Air Force, that felt like enough. 6 months had changed everything. Jordan stood at the front of the Chicago Fire Academy training facility, watching 30 paramedics from across the city file into the simulation lab. Some were veterans with decades of experience. Others were rookies who'd barely finished their probationary periods. All of them had volunteered for the most demanding training program the department had ever offered: Tactical Emergency Medical Support, TEMS. The program that had gone from concept to reality in half a year, built on the foundation of one woman's refusal to let people die when she knew she could save them. "Good morning." Jordan's voice carried the authority that came from 8 years of leading operators in situations where hesitation meant death. "Welcome to Week 3 of TEMS certification. Today we're covering hemorrhage control in hostile environments. By the end of this session, you'll be able to identify arterial bleeds under stress, apply tourniquets with one hand while using the other for cover, and make triage decisions in under 10 seconds. In the third row, Captain Reeves sat taking notes alongside Tommy Chen. The captain had been true to his word, attending every training session despite running Station 51 full-time. His presence sent a message to every paramedic in the room. If a 24-year veteran wasn't too proud to learn, nobody had an excuse. Jordan moved through the demonstration with practiced efficiency: combat gauze application, pressure point identification. The specific techniques that existed in the gray area between civilian protocols and battlefield necessity. She'd learned to teach without revealing the classified details, to share skills without exposing the missions that had taught them. "Blake." Lieutenant Morrison raised her hand from the front row. "Last week you mentioned pattern recognition in mass casualty situations. Can you elaborate on identifying secondary devices or delayed collapses?" Jordan nodded, moving to the whiteboard. "Construction collapses and terrorist incidents share similar characteristics. You're looking for asymmetric damage patterns, blast signatures that don't match structural failure, injury distributions that suggest multiple event sources." As she talked, Jordan caught sight of herself in the mirrored observation window. She looked different than she had 6 months ago, confident instead of hiding, present instead of invisible. The tactical watch was gone, replaced by a standard-issue timepiece that didn't cover the trident tattoo on her wrist. She wore it openly now, along with the jump wings patch on her training uniform. The simulation portion of class involved scenarios Jordan had designed based on real incidents: active shooter with multiple casualties, barricaded suspect with hostages requiring medical intervention, mass casualty vehicle attack with secondary explosive devices. Each scenario pushed trainees to their limits, forcing decisions that had no perfect answers. Tommy executed his run with growing confidence, moving through the simulated hot zone with techniques Jordan had taught him over hundreds of hours. He spotted the compensating patient, identified the arterial bleed, applied the tourniquet while maintaining cover. Not perfect, but competent. Capable. The insecure rookie had transformed into someone Jordan would trust at her back in any emergency. "Excellent work, Chen." Jordan gave him a nod that carried genuine pride. "You just saved 2 lives that would have been lost 6 months ago." After class, Jordan found a moment of quiet in her office. The walls were covered with program statistics that still seemed surreal. 47 high-risk interventions since TEMS launched. 93 lives saved in situations previously deemed too dangerous for EMS response. 0 deaths among TEMS-trained personnel. The program was being studied by fire departments nationwide, requests coming in from cities that wanted to replicate Chicago's model. Her phone showed a text from Dr. Park. Tom Cavanaugh sending another photo. He made it to the wedding. "Granddaughter says to tell you thank you." Jordan opened the attached image. Tom in a tuxedo, beaming beside a bride in white. The stroke that should have killed him now, just a footnote in his continued story. One life. One save. One person experiencing moments that mattered, because Jordan had refused to accept the obvious diagnosis on her first call. There was a knock on the door. Sergeant Hawk Hawkins stood in the doorway, his left arm in a support brace from the construction collapse but otherwise recovered. He'd visited the academy twice since the incident, always with that look of recognition that said he understood exactly who Jordan was and what her training meant. Major Blake. "Got a minute?" Jordan gestured to the chair across from her desk. "How's the arm?" Physical therapy says another 2 months before full function. He sat carefully. But I wanted to thank you. Not just for the medical care, but for what you're doing here. Training people to save lives the way you saved mine, and 24 others in Kandahar. Jordan met his eyes. I hope you're not sharing classified details about Operation Salvage. Hawk smiled. Only the parts that are public record. But Blake, what you're building here matters. Every paramedic you train is someone who'll run toward danger instead of waiting for scene security. Someone who'll see what others miss. Someone who'll refuse to give up when protocol says it's hopeless. That's the goal. Jordan looked out the window at the training grounds where her students were practicing field medicine techniques. Create a system where saving lives doesn't require violating protocols, because the protocols themselves recognize that sometimes standard procedures get people killed. Hawk stood to leave, then paused. The Rangers you saved in Kandahar. Most of them are out now, living civilian lives because you refused to follow orders that would have left us to die. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. They asked me to give you this. Jordan opened it to find a letter signed by 23 names she remembered from that endless night of gunfire and blood and impossible decisions. Each signature accompanied by a brief note. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for proving that some things matter more than mission objectives. Her vision blurred, reading words that validated the choice that had cost her military career. The choice she'd second-guessed for years, wondering if command had been right, if she'd failed by prioritizing medical over tactical. Tell them thank you. Jordan's voice was rough with emotion. And tell them that every person I train, every life this program saves, that's me proving they were worth it. That choosing to save them wasn't failure. It was the most important success of my life. After Hawk left, Jordan sat in the quiet office, processing the weight of 6 months' transformation. She'd come to Chicago trying to hide from who she'd been, trying to become someone simpler and less complicated. Instead, she discovered that you couldn't run from your training, couldn't deny your nature, couldn't pretend that 8 years of learning to save lives under impossible conditions was something you could just forget. But she'd also learned something more important, that accepting who you were didn't mean carrying the burden alone. Tommy, Reeves, Morrison, the 30 paramedics in today's class, they were learning to share the weight, to be the people who ran toward danger instead of away, to make the impossible decisions Jordan had been making alone for too long. The evening shift briefing found Jordan back at Station 51, standing in the apparatus bay where her journey had started 18 hours that felt like a lifetime ago. The crews assembled, a mix of familiar faces and new transfers who'd heard about the TEMS program and requested assignment to Station 51 specifically. We have 3 TEMS certified paramedics on duty tonight. Jordan kept her briefing concise. Blake, Chen, Rodriguez. Standard protocols apply for routine calls, but if we get high-risk dispatch, TEMS protocols take precedence. Remember your training, trust your assessment, and don't hesitate to call for backup if you need it. As the briefing broke up, Captain Reeves approached. Blake, got a call from FEMA this afternoon. They want you to design national curriculum for tactical EMS programs. 3 months a year. Traveling to train instructors across the country. Jordan raised an eyebrow. That would take me away from Chicago pretty regularly, which is why I told them you'd only do it if you could bring your team. Reeves smiled slightly. Chicago Fire gets credit for training the trainers. You get to share what you know nationally. And Tommy, Morrison, Rodriguez, they get experience teaching at the highest level. And you? Jordan asked. I get to keep saying I learned tactical medicine from the Air Force PJ who saved 23 Rangers. Reeves's expression turned serious. Blake, 6 months ago I tried to force you into a box labeled average paramedic following standard protocols. I was wrong. Chicago needs what you are, and now the country needs it too. The dispatch tones interrupted before Jordan could respond. Ambulance 51, Engine 81, Truck 19, Battalion 25. Multi-vehicle accident with entrapment, Lakeshore Drive northbound at Monroe. Multiple casualties reported. Jordan was moving toward the ambulance before the full dispatch finished. Tommy fell in beside her, pulling on gloves with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times under her training. Ready for another shift, partner? Tommy asked. Jordan caught her reflection in the ambulance's side mirror as they pulled out of the station. She saw herself clearly now. Not hiding. Not diminished. Just a paramedic who'd learned to save lives in hell and was teaching others to do the same. Always ready, she said, feeling the weight of the para-rescue motto that had defined her life. Because that's what we do. We run toward the chaos. We refuse to give up. And we bring people home. The ambulance raced through Chicago's evening traffic, lights and sirens announcing their purpose. Behind them, Engine 81 and Truck 19 followed, crews ready for whatever emergency awaited. And in Jordan's mind, she carried the knowledge that somewhere across the city, 30 paramedics were working shifts armed with skills she'd taught them. Skills that would save lives that would otherwise be lost. Jordan Blake's story wasn't about hiding who she'd been. It was about accepting who she'd always been and teaching others to share the burden. Every call, every save, every person trained to see what others missed. That was her mission now. Not classified operations in distant war zones, but building a force of emergency responders who understood that protocols were guidelines, not absolutes. That sometimes saving lives required breaking rules. That the difference between life and death often came down to someone refusing to give up when everyone else already had. Across Chicago and soon across the country, that lesson was spreading. One paramedic at a time. One life at a time. One person choosing to run toward danger instead of away from it. And it all started with a woman who'd tried to hide her training, only to discover that some skills were too important to bury, some knowledge too valuable to waste, some callings too fundamental to deny. If this story resonated with you, there are countless others waiting to be told. Heroes who transformed their past into purpose. Medical professionals who learned that breaking the rules sometimes means saving lives. Ordinary people who discovered extraordinary courage when circumstances demanded it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between following protocol and doing what you knew was right? Do you know someone whose hidden skills made all the difference when it mattered most? And if you want to hear more stories of courage, transformation, and people who refuse to let their past define their future, subscribe to Emergency Heroes Stories. Because every week, we share tales of ordinary people who became extraordinary when lives were on the line. Thank you for joining us on Jordan Blake's journey from hiding to healing, from running away to running toward. Until the next story finds us, remember that the person you've been doesn't limit who you can become. It shapes who you're meant to be.